Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, as you can see, it's a really, really busy and interesting news morning, and more stories still on the front pages. Here's the Sunday Telegraph. They've got a very interesting story about the Kremlin spies, the different agencies all at war over the bungled Salisbury interviews and all of that. And in a day of many interviews, a very unlikely one there from Jeffrey Archer, saying that if he was a northerner, strange thought, he'd be voting for Corbyn. Strange of thought too from him. Very, very interesting interviews we heard in the news then with Ruth Davidson on the front page of the Sunday Times. Politicians very rarely say never. She is saying, I never want to be Prime Minister. It's too much of a risk to my mental health. Very sensible thing to say, but it rules out of contention one of the most prominent, in fact, the most prominent and eloquent moderate Tory in the country. So that's a big political story as well. The Observer there has another big political story we'll be hearing more about. Sadiq Khan, the Labour mayor. Calling for a people's vote, a second referendum. What does that mean? I'll be talking to him later on. Let us start, however, with Rachel and the front page of The Observer.
Yeah, so we have Sadiq Khan, London mayor. He's written in The Observer saying that people now need a chance to vote on the EU deal that the government comes back with. So he's now essentially backing a people's vote. And that is part of a continuum. Last week we saw the three major unions in the UK, Unison, Unite, GMB. They polled their members who also favoured a people's vote. And this piece also talks about 100 anti-Brexit motions from local Labour parties, which will be brought to...
So the Labour conference is going to be a big deal on all of this, isn't it?
Yeah, the Labour leadership, of course, would still prefer a vote to force an election, to force a general election. They want to deal not just with Brexit, but with the causes of Brexit. And it's interesting that that's coming up in a week where we're looking at the ravaging, devastating effects of the economic crash and the austerity measures that followed. We've had reports linking austerity to the Brexit vote. People in areas that were more devastated by austerity measures were more likely to vote leave. So, of course, the Labour Party wants to reboot the economy to address some of these devastating economic issues that have affected people up and down the country.
Do you think, Rachel, that Jeremy Corbyn is going to be moved away from his very, very neutral position about a people's vote? Do you think he's going to be obliged to go further at the Labour conference?
Well, as I said, the preference for the leadership does seem to indicate that they would prefer a general election. And why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they not prefer an opportunity to get rid of a government that is rowing on our time? You know, they're falling apart while they're in power. Nothing else is getting done while they're doing that. Why wouldn't the Labour Party prefer a chance to get rid of that?
Well, my first guest this morning is Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London. Sadiq Khan, welcome. Now, you are coming out today for a second referendum on the Brexit issue. Why?
Well, I've thought long and hard about this. I've spent the last 2 years and 3 months working with the government to get the best deal from the European Union. I've met with the Brexit Secretary, David Davis, many, many times, the Prime Minister and others. I've given to the government, City Hall, advice and information. I've been to Brussels to meet with various EU presidents, officials, politicians, to explain to them how an extreme hard Brexit is bad for them too. And the reality is this, Andrew. We've now reached a position where there are two outcomes as a consequence of the government's negotiations. A bad deal, and by that I include us leaving the EU without knowing the terms of the future relationship, sort of blindfold Brexit, or no deal. And independent research undertaken for us shows that no deal would lead to 500,000 fewer jobs, 87,000 fewer jobs in London alone, and £50 billion less investment in our country. That's bad for our country, hugely damaging to London and our country.
So you're against Brexit, and that is familiar, but on the idea of a second referendum, you have changed your mind quite dramatically.
This is really important. I'm not one of those advocating for a rerun. I'm not a referendum guy. What I'm saying is, for the first time ever,
we need a second referendum.
The British public should have a say on the outcome of the negotiations, including what the Prime Minister negotiates with the EU, plus the option of staying in the EU.
Let's just remind ourselves what you said after the first referendum on LBC.
I think the problem for those of us who are saying to the British public there should be a second referendum it will lead to even more cynicism. It will lead to the British public saying, hold on a sec, these were the rules of the game. We voted in record numbers and now you're ignoring us. And I've got grievances about the way the campaign was conducted, but the reality is, Gillian, the British public had a say. They voted, and they voted to leave. And my job as the Mayor of London is to heal some of the rifts that were created during the campaign and make sure our city carries on being the greatest city in the world. And I've done that. So one of the things I could have done over the last 2 years and 3 months is cross my arms and watch it all fail and say, I told you so. I've met David Davis 8 times. I met the Prime Minister, the Chancellor.
But you said then, no going back. It would create cynicism and create rifts. What's changed?
And it's really important that this is not a rerun of the referendum, but the British public having a say for the first time on the outcome.
But it is a second referendum.
Well,
that's what it is.
Yeah, but when the campaign was taking place, Boris Johnson said we could leave the EU and have access to the single market. Untrue. Liam Fox said this would be the easiest trade deal to be done in history. Untrue. Nobody said there'd be jobs being lost. We have from London already the European Medicines Agency leaving London to go to Amsterdam, 900 jobs plus some. We've already got example of Euroclearing leaving London. We have NHS wards.
So the evidence has changed, is your answer? Because
no, but
some of your colleagues, I mean, Andy Burnham up in Manchester says there would be civil unrest in Greater Manchester if the vote was rerun in any sense.
Let me tell you the facts, which are the police currently are preparing for the possibility of civil unrest. That's happening now already. What's happening now already are NHS wards understaffed. What's happening now already is developers I speak to telling me construction workers haven't returned from their summer holidays. What's happening already is the highest vacancy rates in London for mental health nurses, for NHS nurses and for social care.
Let me just read you what Barry Gardiner in the Shadow Cabinet said about this. He said, "This is playing with our democracy. It is playing with the foundations of our country in a way that is really, really damaging. We have to respect people's votes in that referendum."
You know what would be so incredibly divisive is if the public didn't have a say on the outcome of the negotiations and it was lead to livelihoods being damaged, leads to businesses suffering, leads to the possibility, and this is now a real possibility, of our national security being weakened because we can't have the same access to information with our European colleagues as we have now.
OK, let's move on from the principle then to the actual practicalities. The first referendum, where the two main parties were basically agreed, and it was a very straightforward binary vote, took nearly a year of parliamentary work to get ready. We have only a few months to go now before we leave the EU. It's not possible, is it?
Well, look, what could very easily happen is our government says to the European Union, let's suspend...
But our government's against the second vote, so they're not going to.
Well, hold on a sec. I mean, what's clear is Theresa May can't even negotiate within her own party, let alone the European Union. So what needs to happen is this. We defer us leaving the European Union to allow the British public for the first time to have a say on the outcome of the negotiations. Really important that happens. The reality is this. The Conservative Party already has rejected Chequer. The European Union has rejected the Chequer offer. So we're in a situation where we could slide out of the European Union with either no deal, we know that'd be hugely damaging to London and the country, or a bad deal. And that includes, by the way...
So are you calling now for Article 50 to be extended so that a people's vote or a second referendum can actually happen?
Well, bearing in mind the proximity to us leaving the European Union, bearing in mind how we're already seeing some of the consequences of a bad deal or potential no deal, I think the sensible thing for the Prime Minister to do would be called a general election. And that's my first option. I think we should have a general election so we can have a Labour government installed in Downing Street. Well, that's my point. If we can't get 2/3 of the majority to agree to a new election, or there's not going to be a general election, the next best thing is for the British public to have a say on the outcome of the negotiations. And by the way, this is the public taking back control from politicians who have failed.
What did Jeremy Corbyn say when you told him what you were going to do?
Well, I've been fully supportive of the 6 tests. I've been fully supportive of us having all the options on the table.
What did he say?
Well, Jeremy unreasonably reminded me, and he's right to do so, but we've got a position now where the 6 tests are set out there clearly. What appears to me is the government's not going to meet those 6 tests. I would, like Jeremy, want to see a general election. I want to see Jeremy Corbyn as our Prime Minister. If that's not going to happen, as far as I'm concerned, the British public should have a say on the outcome of negotiations, including the option of staying in the EU.
As Rachel Shabby was pointing out, there's three big unions come out for the people's vote, so-called, the second referendum. Francis O'Grady of the TUC has done so as well. Now you're doing it. Is this going to be a crunch moment, the Labour Party conference? Are you going to be able to shift party policy on this?
Well, the way we work is we don't have crunch moments or pressure.
Go on, have a crunch moment, please.
The Labour Party makes policy for our party. And one of the good things about this leadership is they encourage debate and votes after debates as well. And I think the reality is, because of Jeremy Corbyn, John McDonnell, Keir Starmer, Emily Thornberry's hard work over the summer, the TUC motion last week, the various work being done by members across the country around CLPs, we will have a debate at a conference with a vote as well.
Really big question is, what is the question?
You mean on the referendum?
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the things that, it's really important Parliament resolves. I would like to see one of the options on the referendum, the option to stay in the European Union. The British public have now seen all the promises broken by the likes of Michael Gove, Boris Johnson, Ian Fox and others.
What is the question? Is it Theresa May's compromise or staying in the EU? Is that the question?
I think the question should be a choice between the deal done by this government or staying in the European Union. And the deal done by this government, we can now see what actually the consequences would be. 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, when this debate was taking place, it was theoretical, it was abstract. We were told, for example, various things by Brexiteers that haven't proved to be true.
That would cut out all of those people who want something more than Theresa May is offering. All those people who want a so-called hard Brexit would be completely disenfranchised by your idea.
Well, because the reality is the options on the table are the deals negotiated by the government. And those are one of two things, a bad deal or no deal. And my point is this, rather than having a bad deal or a no deal, let's put that to the British public with the option of staying in the EU.
This is going to get a lot of attention. Is this a distraction from your own record as mayor? Because you have been under a huge amount of attack over knife crime, housing, transport and much else in London.
I'm really happy to talk about my record over the last 2 years, from record numbers of homes, affordable homes begun last year, record numbers of social rent homes begun last year, 4 times more than previous 4 years.
You're under huge attack, including from London's main newspaper, the Evening Standard, which ran the Khan files.
Well, listen,
we can see the front pages.
Yeah,
and they've been doing this day after day after day. There we are.
Listen,
are you concerned about this is starting to cut home among London voters? I mean,
can I reassure you, George Osborne doesn't concern me the slightest. And if he wants to rewrite history, if he wants the Londoners to have selective amnesia, it's not going to work. So I'm going to remind Londoners that the architect of the massive cuts to the police in London, the massive cuts to youth services in London, David Cameron's right-hand man when we had the referendum was George Osborne. And if he wants to go to battle with me, good luck, looking forward to it.
Sounding very personal, Sadiq Khan. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Now, Sir Vince Cable, leader of the Liberal Democrats, wants to change the party's rule book so that almost anyone, you don't even have to be an MP anymore, could succeed him. Sir Vince popped into the studio an hour ago on his way to the party conference in Brighton, and I asked him first about his own future.
I want to see the party through the whole of this Brexit argument. If there is a general election in the turbulence generated by Brexit next year, I will be there to lead us into election, through it, after it. I'd like to see through these internal party reforms. We've got local elections next year. No, I've got a big programme of work.
But you're not going to be leader of the Liberal Democrats by the end of next year?
I think that's uncertain. I've a series of tasks to do. I'm going to do them. I'm not setting a time horizon. I think it would be foolish to do so with so much uncertainty flying around.
But certainly the tone has changed. When we talked in February, you said you were really loving the job and you were certainly going to be Lib Dem leader for the next general election in 2022. It doesn't feel that way now.
Well, 2022 is a long time off, and I think it's improbable, actually, that I will be leading us then. But there is a big programme of work to do. It may take some time. I'm getting on with it. But I'm also looking to help a professional transition to a new next generation.
So your predecessor, Ming Campbell, said he's running out of road.
I'm not running out of road. There's a lot of road ahead. I mean, I think there's sort of massive opportunities for us here. I mean, we've got this, the chaos that's generating around Brexit. It's a complete mess. Neither of the major parties offering solutions. I think people increasingly looking to us to provide it, and I want to lead us through that.
And as you yourself have said, in both of the main parties, the Tories over Brexit and Labour over Jeremy Corbyn and other issues, there is great unhappiness in the parliamentary parties. Lots and lots of unhappy Labour and Tory MPs. How many of them have defected to you?
They haven't.
Why not?
Well, I think, tribal loyalty in Britain is quite deep. It is actually very difficult to cross over. But I mean, what is happening at the moment is that a lot of Tory and Labour MPs, are reconsidering their position. They're not going to stay in the parties if they remain as they are. I think they're waiting to see which of their parties change over Brexit. We're certainly talking to them. We're happy to cooperate and work with them.
I'm not just asking this to be mean. There is a genuinely puzzling issue here, because lots of people say there needs to be a centre party, there needs to be a new strong force, and then someone says, yes, there's the Lib Dems, and it's always as an afterthought. Somehow your party hasn't attracted the attention and the glamour and the glitz necessary to reshape British politics. Something has gone wrong, and I think everybody is puzzled as to what.
Well, what went wrong is we had 2 difficult general elections, as you know, but we've been rebuilding since. We've had the best local election results for 15 years. Poll ratings are probably now 4 or 5% up on when I took over. Now, we should be doing a lot more. But I think that we're heading very much in the right direction. And the whole purpose of these party reforms I've been talking about is to take us on to the next level. Indeed,
and you've talked about a movement for moderates. What is that?
Well, a lot of people don't classify themselves as moderate, but then these are sort of progressive, radical people, but in the centre of politics, who don't embrace the extremes of left and right, who will be, who are waiting in a way for a movement that will lead them, and I want our party to provide it.
But if they're not already Lib Dem members, they're not on their way down to your party conference in Brighton already, how do you bring people in?
Well, we already are. We've got 100,000 members, 200,000 supporters. It's growing at a rapid rate. It is happening. The question is about how fast. And I think that, with our very clear position on the big issue of the day, supporting the people's vote on the Brexit issue, our very clear opposition to Brexit, the programme I'm going to be setting out this week in terms of a positive view about when we get past the Brexit controversy, I think people will start to come to us in much greater numbers.
It must feel slightly surreal being Michael Gove. You're one of the main faces of the Leave campaign, very positive about our economic future. Then you stand for the leadership, that goes badly. The winner, Theresa May, sacks you, and then she brings you back, and you're reincarnated as a moderately green environment secretary. And now, as per this morning, the chief salesman for Mrs May's Brexit compromise. Welcome.
Welcome, Andrew. It's very kind of you to express such generous concern for me. But it's not about me, it's not about any individual. It's about a team making sure that we deliver the referendum mandate. And when you had Sadiq on earlier, I felt it was interesting and troubling that he wants essentially to frustrate the vote that we had 2.5 years ago. People voted clearly, 17.4 million people voted to leave the European Union. And Sadiq is essentially saying, stop. Let's delay that whole process. Let's throw it into chaos. And I think that would be a profound mistake.
And so what we have instead of that in front of the country is the Chequers compromise. Can I ask you, if that goes through, big if it happens, if it's brought back and voted on, is that permanent or is it a temporary solution?
I think it's the right solution for this country to leave the European Union on the basis of what we've negotiated. And I think it's absolutely right, because we would be outside the single market, we would be outside the customs union, we would be outside the common agricultural policy and outside the common fisheries policy. We'd have an end to free movement.
Okay, you have eloquently and fluently refused to answer my question. Is it permanent or is it temporary?
No, I think it's the right answer. Now, the one thing, of course,
permanent.
Well, yeah, but there's one critical thing. A future Prime Minister could always choose to alter the relationship between Britain and the European Union. But the Chequers approach is the right one for now, because we've got to make sure that we respect that vote and take advantage of the opportunities of being outside the European Union. This week, as Environment Secretary, I had the opportunity to explain in detail how we could enhance our environment and at the same time improve food production outside the European Union on the basis of the deal that the Prime Minister has put forward. And now the responsibility is on the European Union, because we've shown flexibility.
I'll come to them in just a second.
I think we need to put the focus on them.
To give a very concrete example, is the Common Rule Book something that we are going to be governed by in 10 or 15 years' time?
Well, we've said that the Common Rule Book, the acquis, these existing regulations, we're prepared to accept, and they've been stable, they haven't changed over time. But we also have a democratic lock. It is up to the House of Commons in the future to chart this nation's destiny and to decide what it is that we want to do if EU law changes. And critically, there's one other thing. The bulk of our economy, as you know, is services, and that will be outside the common rule book. What we do is we have an approach which allows us to have goods moving freely into the European Union without tariffs and quotas, but at the same time we allow the growing part of our economy to be free of EU regulation.
So that's your real message to fellow Brexiteers, is you may hate the Chequers compromise, but don't worry, we'll be out in March and then we can do what we like.
Well, my message is we must ensure that we honour what the British people wanted us to do in that referendum vote, and that means leaving the European Union. And the proposal that the government have put forward is the only proposal on the table which answers in detail all of the concerns that people have, and at the same time critically. It challenges the European Union to say, well, what will your response be? And so far, we've heard from individual European politicians who've acknowledged that there has been flexibility on the part of the British government and compromise, because as I said, the 2 days after...
It certainly has been compromised.
Absolutely.
Can I
and I think
ask
it's
you about the other side as well?
Yes.
Which is, I mean, crucial to the Chequers idea is that we take tariffs to them and they do the same for us. And Michel Barnier has said over the summer in absolutely unequivocal, plain terms, no, that is never going to be acceptable to us. It's off the table completely. So what is Plan B?
Well, Michel Barnier is a tough negotiator on behalf of the European Union, but one of the things that we're all aware of...
on this.
No, well,
unequivocal.
one of the things we're all aware of is that we have a group of European leaders meeting in Salzburg. The Prime Minister is going to be talking to them next week. And as I say, we have shown flexibility in this process. We expect and hope and anticipate that there will be flexibility and compromise. I've compromised. I've been quite clear that, that some of the things that I argued for in the referendum passionately, as a result of Chequers, I have to qualify one or two of my views. I have to acknowledge the parliamentary arithmetic.
You're a compromiser.
Well, I believe that the critical thing is making sure that we leave in good order with a deal which safeguards the referendum mandate. And one thing that I am clear about is that if the European Union, and I believe the signs are positive, accepts our proposition, then we will be out of the political institutions of the European Union, free to decide for ourselves what our policy will be in huge swathes of the area that the British Parliament absolutely wants to diverge from the European Union on.
There's one bit of really good political news for the government from Europe this week. One leader who said, "We would like a fairer Brexit because we love the British and have always cooperated well. You deserve a good deal." Are you pleased to have the support of Viktor Orban of Hungary?
Well, I think the truth is actually that there are a swathe of EU leaders who want the best possible relationship with Britain.
Let's stick with that one.
Well, I think one of the things is that I'm not a, what's the word? It's not for me to rank a league table of EU leaders and to say that one is my favourite or that one I have less time for, because I believe in cooperative diplomacy. I believe in generosity of spirit towards our EU partners, and I would say that there have been a range of EU leaders, all of whom have said that they want to ensure that they have the most positive relationship afterwards. Indeed, Michel Barnier himself said that he wants to have a relationship with the UK, which is the best relationship between the EU and any third country. And I know that...
OK, you're trying to get off Viktor Orban, and I can exactly see why. Let's remind ourselves who he is. He is a very, very authoritarian right-wing leader of Hungary. He's called migrants poison and Muslim invaders. He's widely regarded as anti-Semitic, and for good reasons. He's made it a criminal offence for lawyers to help asylum seekers. And he's targeted the media, the judiciary and NGOs in a very, very aggressive way. This is the man that your party in the European Parliament has decided to support. Why?
No, that's not true. No,
well, it is true.
No, it's not true, Andrew, and it's critically important that we realise this. There was a vote in the European Parliament, but it's a long-standing principle of a number of MEPs from different countries and from different parties not to believe that the European Parliament should interfere in or censure the internal democracy of a particular country. Now, you or I... just one second.
When they're doing this kind of thing.
You or I might have particular views about other countries, but the European Parliament and those within it, British MEPs and others, believe that that's the wrong way of expressing criticism. But there's another thing as well. My view is that the British are traditionally accused of playing divide and rule and picking off individual countries.
This is a man who is...
But I'm not going to play that game, and I'm not going to go down the route of... I have views, as I'm
Okay,
sure you
what
do
are
as
they?
well.
What are they?
No, but I'm not going to be drawn on my views about individual European leaders.
Because you need his support.
No, because I think that it would be wrong for me at a time when we need solidarity against a number of different threats. You mentioned anti-Semitism. We need to make sure that our voice is clear, our position on these issues is absolutely clear and resonant. And I don't believe that individual criticisms of the kind that you're understandably attempting me to make necessarily help us in ensuring that we get both solidarity on the issues that count and the best deal for Britain as we leave the European Union.
I suppose the point I'm making in a circuitous way is that we've had a lot of conversations in this country about anti-Semitism in British politics, and Jeremy Corbyn has been under a lot of criticism for that. Here you are, as a party, voting alongside the most prominent anti-Semitic politician, xenophobic politician, somebody who, as I say, has described migrants as poison. And that's been the Conservative Party's view.
No, I think it's critical.
You voted with him.
No, it's not the case that we voted to support him. It is the case that the MEPs declined on this occasion, as they have on a number of occasions in the past. And there were people from a variety of different parties and a variety of different countries that declined to do so. But that is very, very far from endorsing or supporting the position that he takes.
So why does your good friend, long-time friend, Danny Finkelstein, Lord Finkelstein, a Conservative peer, describe this vote as very distressing and a shameful thing to have happened?
Well, I have enormous respect for Danny, and I wouldn't criticise Danny.
All right, let's turn to somebody else. Do you still regard Mark Carney, the Governor of the Bank of England, as not truly independent?
No, I think that he's doing a very good job.
And you regard him as truly independent?
I regard him not only as truly independent, I regard him as a first-rate public servant who's doing an excellent job. As you know, he came to brief the Cabinet earlier this week, and I believe that Mark Carney is an excellent governor.
You've changed your mind about him, therefore?
Yes, I was critical of him in the past, but I do think that he's doing an excellent job.
And so when he talks to the Cabinet, and you were sitting there at the time, and he says of a range of possibilities that might happen as a result of no deal and various other deals and Brexit, we could see house prices in this country falling by 35%. Do you regard that as just part of Project Fear or a serious warning that you have to think about?
Well, as the Governor himself made clear when he was speaking in Ireland the next day, the figures that were quoted and were attributed to him were actually figures that related to a stress test that he'd undertaken in order to see how resilient our banks were. He was very clear when he talked to the Cabinet, and he's been very clear subsequently that the figures that have been attributed to him were not a scenario, not a prediction that he was saying was a consequence of leaving the European Union. But of course, we need to be clear, as the head of the WTO has said, leaving the European Union without a deal, certainly not going to be the end of the world. Britain will get through it. There are many, many things that we can do to strengthen our economy, but also it's not going to be a walk in the park either. That is why we are focused
civil
on getting
and civil disorder. That came from the police.
No, well, I put that entirely to one side. I think the critical thing is that, of course, there are challenges in leaving without a deal, and my department is doing everything we can in order to meet the requirements, whatever the scenario is. That's why we're focused on getting the best possible deal for Britain, and the proposition that the government has put forward allows us to honour that referendum mandate, to ensure that the 27 EU leaders can all feel that Britain is entering a new partnership, and also, critically, the British people will be reassured that we are doing the right thing, honouring the referendum mandate, taking back control in agriculture, in fisheries, over our economy, and critically also ending free movement so that we decide who comes here and on what terms.
Now, earlier on the Andrew Marr show, we heard the Mayor of London call for a public vote on the outcome of the Brexit negotiations. He denies that this is the same as a never-endum.
You have changed your mind quite dramatically.
This is really important. I'm not one of those advocating for a rerun. I'm not a never-ending guy. What I'm saying is, for the first time ever,
we need a second referendum.
The British public should have a say on the outcome of the negotiations, including what the Prime Minister negotiates with the EU, plus the option of staying in the EU.
I think he may have coined a new term there, never-endum. Teresa, I mean, the Mayor has a point, doesn't he? It isn't as simple as your side made out during the referendum. Why not let people have a vote now on the actual deal?
It's just so undemocratic to ask people to vote again on a question just because there's an elite establishment who doesn't like the answer they were given the first time. There's a history of this across the EU. I think that's wrong. I think we've got to listen to the result of the referendum and we need to implement it.
But the mood has arguably changed. I mean, the Remain vote in London, looking at the polling, it looks like it would be a stronger vote for Remain in London. So people will find it amazing that you're saying it would be undemocratic to have a vote.
Well, the issue has divided London as it has the rest of the country. I mean, we've got to remember that actually there were more people who voted to leave in London than actually gave their first preference vote to Sadiq Khan in the mayoral election. So there's a substantial body of opinion on both sides of this debate. But I think a lot of people, whether they voted Leave or Remain, just want us to get on with it. And having, another referendum, what if Leave won the second referendum? Would the Remain side come and demand a third one? We've just got to accept the result of a democratic vote, get on and implement it.
Andy, what do you say to that? Because,
What I say is get on with what? I mean, Theresa doesn't even agree with her own government's policy. I'm not sure what's undemocratic about voting, and I'm not sure, and when you hear former cabinet ministers talking about the elite, I mean, this is grasping at straws, isn't it? I'm glad Sadiq is showing leadership on the issue, but I think he's also reflecting the view of what a majority of Londoners say. The problem we have now is there's nothing that commands majority support in the House of Commons. We have let people down, I think, in the sense that we cannot, the government particularly, has not drawn anything together over the last 2 years. But what is also clear is that people know a lot more about the consequences of leaving the EU than they did before. They don't yet know what the alternatives are, but when we know what the alternative is, which is either be a bad deal or no deal at all, surely they have the right to cast a vote on that.
And yet some would say, this is opportunism from the mayor. He's gone along, he's sort of broadly supported the government for the last 2 years, and now he's leaping in, and none of this division is not going to help us in our negotiations with the EU.
Because Sadiq, as a serious politician, he has engaged with this, with David Davis. When he was Brexit Secretary, he actually outlasted most of the people there, and he has seriously been trying to negotiate because he knows what the real disaster this will be for the London economy in particular if it goes through. But I think he's right to speak out now, and certainly there is a strong move towards a people's vote, not just in London but around the country, from former Leave voters as well as from Remain voters.
And Theresa, I suppose that's it, finally. What are you afraid of? I mean, it is true to say, as Andy says, there is no coherent policy coming out of your party. You're divided down the middle. You had 50 MPs this week gathering together, allegedly calling for the head of the Prime Minister. Aren't we going to get to a point where really having another vote on this is actually the only option?
But it's incredibly patronising to tell people who voted to leave last time round that somehow they didn't understand what they were doing. They were voting to take back control of our laws, our money and our borders. That's what we need to do. Yes, there's a debate about the precise nature of the agreement we need to seek with the European Union.
It was a very binary question last time, wasn't it? Actually now we are giving people nuance. We'd be able to give them a real option. Many people would say that is simply the case, and you need to let people decide.
A significant majority in Parliament voted to have a referendum to give the decision to the people in a vote. In that final hustings debate before the referendum, the Mayor of London was very clear, if you vote to leave, that is it, your decision will be implemented, there will be no going back. He should stick to that promise he made at that final debate.
OK, all right, thank you to both of you. Most of the nation seems divided down the middle over the nature of the deal that Britain should try to effect on leaving the EU. You can hear some of that here in the studio. But London is out of step with most of the rest of the country, with recent polling showing that if there was a referendum today, there would be a 66% vote to Remain. Now, Jessica Ure went along to a public debate this week to check out the political mood here in the capital.
London, a Remain stronghold in the referendum. Recent polling suggests that support for remaining in the EU has increased since then, but there's still a significant minority for leaving the capital who want their voices to be heard. Brexit will be good for London was the challenging motion argued at the London Brexit debate this week. With the government divided over the Chequers Agreement and support building for a second referendum, feelings are divided in the city.
In June of 2016, 60% of the people that voted in London were in favour of Remain. Now, with less than 200 days to go, how exactly have feelings changed in the capital?
And I think a no-deal Brexit would bring a lot of benefits, many more benefits, than actually continuing to shackle ourselves to European Union law and regulation for years to come. And London is part of the United Kingdom, and we can only join or leave the European Union as a United Kingdom. So London will be going with the flow. I think the great thing is that London has the adaptability and skills and vitality to be able to respond to that, which it does, clearly. One of the most creative cities in the world.
Well, Brexit is not good for London. I shall be arguing the case strongly against. You've only got to see day in, day out what's in the news. Brexit is bad for London, bad for London's economy, and ultimately bad for the UK. We need free movement of people. We need it for our economy. The jobs in the city are already going. They can't get the skilled workforce. They're moving jobs to other cities in Europe so they can continue to trade, and that's only just the start.
In, out, deal or no deal. Many argue the ongoing uncertainty is having an effect. And this week, a think tank has pushed London from the top spot of its global financial centres list.
Theresa Villiers, we just heard at the end of the VT there, London has slipped behind New York as the financial capital. That's terrible, isn't it?
Well, I don't accept that statement, but certainly we've got unemployment is at a 40-year low in this country. The economy is performing strongly. We were told by the supporters of Remain that there would be an immediate economic shock as soon as people voted to leave. That hasn't happened. I believe that there are many opportunities for this city after we leave the European Union, regain control over our economy and over our laws.
So you think once we leave the EU that the City of London will rally and will go back above New York? That's what you think is actually going to happen?
The City of London continues to be hugely successful. The City of London continues to be the leading financial centre in the world. I believe that will carry on after Brexit, and you know the predictions of the Remain side have not come to pass. They predicted this economic shock, and yet we've got record levels of foreign direct investment. We've got people like Google and Apple and GlaxoSmithKline, huge global multinational corporations making long-term investments in this city, in this country, demonstrating that they believe that we are a great place in which to do business, and that's only going to become more so after we leave the European Union.
But we also have large numbers of international businesses relocating staff to other parts of Europe, rethinking, moving around the European Medicines Agency, lots of large companies thinking and looking at putting staff in other places. As a London MP in a city where the polling is telling us 66% of people, and I think even in your constituency the polling says this, are deeply concerned about Brexit, do you not feel you should be sort of representing the views of those people?
I believe that there are huge opportunities that come with leaving the European Union, revitalising our democracy, regaining control over the way we run our economy, regaining control over our laws, opening up opportunities to do trade agreements with countries around the world. These are opportunities we should grasp. We should be talking up the economy, and we should listen to, there are many foreign companies that have made huge investments in this country, in this city, since the referendum, demonstrating their confidence in the UK economy, in or out of the European Union.
As you may have noticed, Lord Adonis has shuffled into the studio, managed to make it in. I know you had some difficulties getting here. Thank you for joining us. You've heard what Theresa Villiers has to say there. People voted for this. We're moving forward. Actually, the economy's doing quite well. The doommongers were wrong.
The significant thing about the politics of today is what Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, has done, representing Londoners at large, because he has he's got his finger on the pulse of what Londoners at large are thinking. He has come out for a people's vote on the grounds that the Brexit process is being so catastrophically handled by Theresa May, Boris Johnson as was, and the government at the moment, that the right thing to do and the absolutely essential thing for London, because its whole future is at stake as a serious business centre, is to put this issue to the people. When the Prime Minister produces her deal, whatever it is, or no deal at the end of the year, that goes to the people. And the alternative is the alternative that has been clearly apparent all the way through this, which is that having seen the terms of the deal, it's like buying a house, we're now seeing the survey, people can say, hey, I don't like this. The right thing to do is to stay, not to do this economic damage to me, my family, my friends, and provided there's a majority in Parliament for it, and I think that there will be, then we'll have a people's vote sometime next year.
Is there not a problem, though, that you may have convinced a majority of people in London, but actually London in the referendum was out of step with the rest of the country, and actually That argument hasn't been won elsewhere in the UK.
Opinion is shifting across the country now. I go up and down the country. I was doing another BBC programme, Any Questions, on Friday in Worthing, which is a place that voted leave, and there was huge support for a people's vote. The answer to a problem which we've got at the moment in our government, which is a chronic problem, which is that people were sold a pack of lies 2 years ago about what Brexit would be about. Do you remember the 350 million on the side of the bus? The government's already agreed 50 billion as the exit fee for leaving the EU. As people see the facts as against the lies, they want their say. We're a democracy, that's quite right. And Sadiq Khan, I think, has got his finger really on the pulse today in saying that this is what should happen, not just for Londoners, but for people across the country.
But do you worry that there is another large cohort of people that actually would feel, we know how divisive this issue was, there's a large cohort of people who would feel betrayed if there was to be another vote, because they say, we voted and that was the answer?
The people can't betray themselves. I'm not saying that this should be foisted on them. What I'm saying is that this issue is so big, the consequences for people's jobs, their families, their country is so vast that they should have to say. It shouldn't be left to politicians in Westminster. And now that the Mayor of London, who has the biggest electoral mandate of any individual in the entire country, no more than 1 million people voted for Sadiq Khan as Mayor of London, now he's come out for it. I think people up and down the country are going to take notice.
All right. Well, thank you to all of my guests. Thank you for joining us today.